documents lined up. Got it. Amazing.
Are we recording? It looks like we're.
Yes, it said yes, and I said clicked got it, so I just consented on my end of things.
Okay, cool.
I'm going through like one or two other things, because I brought in some of my own writings that I was going to share like excerpts of when we're looking at some of the visuals.
That's good.
Oh, I have it right here. Yeah, I have it like, you know me, very Virgo, Mars, you know, everything's lined up. Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. We'll put this off. Everything else can just go below. Amazing. All right. This week. Navigating.
Let me make sure that there's no one in the waiting room.
Okay. Yep, I'm officially in like the ready category for everything. Got my stuff queued up.
Okay.
And if it doesn't play the video, it will be fine. It's Friday evening. Like, I'm not gonna stress about it. I guess I have a class more or less at the same time as you. I teach one from like 1 to 5:30. A lot of plaster mess.
Okay, cool. Let's get started then. Shall we?
Ready.
Okay. Hi, everybody. We have a guest today. Her name is Mallory Kimmel, and she used to be my student at CCA, and you got your MFA from CCA. And Mallory's claim to fame is she made it. Yay!
Oh my God.
We're all here in professional practice class trying to like learn how to make it. So if you can teach us, we'll be very.
I'm happy to teach you. I'm very happy to teach you. I was just like in cahoots with Christine talking about how anxious I was at the same time in the program. So I have I'm just gonna go through my practice here and then talk to you about how I went about securing an adjunct professorship position at the Corcoran School of Art at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And my other position that I do professionally is I am the art collection technician at the Community College of Baltimore County, where I manage the permanent art collection for 3 college campuses. Independently, I have a supervisor, but they run the gallery. So those are the 2 positions I do right now. And I'm going to just kind of walk you through my practice, where I was in grad school, how my practice has evolved since. And I'm going to cover just like loosely how I got the teaching position and how I started publishing some of my work. And I'll make room and time for questions afterwards. So I have my email on my website at the end as well, in case you want to reach out and ask any kind of specific pointed questions, whether you're comfortable or we don't get to you or anything like that. Okay, so I'm going to see if this will allow me to share screen. Christine, if we have any problems, just let me know. All right, here we go. I'm gonna pop this up there. Present. Beautiful. Can we see it?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So this is my little presentation. So it's Life After Grad School with Mallory Kimmel. So just something cute to get us started with. You all know Sam Vernon. So this was just posted not too long ago, probably like a couple months ago. She posted a question on Instagram that says, what is the highest form of ritual in art? And I just responded saying, baby steps, self-care, patience, grace, and forgiveness, because really you're playing the long game and you have to just kind of be kind with yourself. So I kind of thought this was a good opener and a good place to start. All right. Here we go. Sorry. So looking kind of to frame my work in grad school, which I might just actually pause and just say what I would consider myself. So I would say professionally, I consider myself a critical phenomenologist whose work takes form in interactive sculpture, performance, critical writing, and some social practice. And I'm going to kind of frame the research I was doing in grad school through these three texts right here. So the first one is Object-Oriented Ontology, A New Theory of Everything by Graham Harman. And that first book is a contemporary philosopher here in America who's kind of building on the work of continental philosophers from the 20th century, namely Heidegger, excuse me, who's a German philosopher who talks a lot about phenomenology, which, if you're not familiar with that term, is wisdom through lived experience. And it often has to do with a kind of tactile, physical touch experience. So kind of foraging these relationships between humans and objects, how to distinguish the two from one another, and how to do that through kind of a physical embodied experience that you can derive wisdom from. So that's the first one. And Graham Harman expands upon Heidegger's work by talking about leveling the playing field, where humans essentially are very humanistic and they privilege the ego of being a human. And how do we kind of level the playing field where all objects and living beings are at the same level in terms of like social hierarchy with humans? So it's kind of object-oriented ontology as a quick overview. Persons and Things by Roberto Esposito is a book that's organized in three parts. The first part is talking about people. So like what delineates a person, like what makes a person a person? How do you differentiate that from the middle portion, which is a thing? And then the third part is the body, and how the body doesn't really constitute being a thing or a person. And so we start talking about, you know, all of the politics around bodies in the sense of who owns the body. Does the individual own the body? Does the state own the body? When you die, right, the self or the person, the body remains even if the self or the individual that we gave personhood is no longer present. And so it kind of goes into a lot of these issues where kind of religion seeps into politics. And it also talks a lot about the politics around, you know, anyone being objectified, or the sense of being made figuratively an object so that you can be a possession, in the sense where you can be denied human rights. And then the third one is Hyperobjects, which is by Timothy Morton. And Timothy Morton, with this term hyperobjects that he claimed, it's essentially the idea that an object can be like non-physical and non-tangible and non-visible because it exists as such a macro body. And that macro body can, in my mind's eye, it feels very synonymous to the mechanics of ideology. And he's often talking about the kind of social mechanics of the environment and climate change issues. And just a little bit of background on myself, like Christine said, I got my MFA in Fine Arts from California College of the Arts in 2019. And prior to that, I had gotten 2 bachelor's degrees, one in studio art and the other in ecology. So some of that ecology pops up here and there. So much of what I was saying in my preoccupations in grad school was this real desire to want to seek comfort and somehow be seeking comfort with objects. And come my second year, my fall semester, I had essentially landed the opportunity to take the chair course in the furniture department. And I was really, really preoccupied with chairs. A lot of the work is kind of in a chair vernacular, which we'll see here in a moment. And looking through the lens of furniture design, you're designing for the body, right? the body being the person, and them having this kind of embodied or physical relationship with a thing, a piece of furniture. But as you know, there's no universal body, but the engineered and designed world around us has a kind of set of standard dimensions. Those standard dimensions comes from a sector of science called ergonomics. And ergonomics began and was kind of named its own sector of science in 1940s. And this sector and this kind of origin of all of these universal dimensions comes from measuring cis white military male bodies, right? So it's the idea that how might we approach designing the world for not only comfort, but for peak physical fitness when it comes to kind of organ function. So we're kind of placing here in A, B, and C positions, these different working positions for somebody who may or may not be working in the military, whether they're standing, obviously this reference in the third one to like acts of violence, shooting, right? But even just seated. So the entire design world around us is informed or designed for cis white male military bodies. And if we do not identify as having a cis white male military body, then the world is not designed for us. So this is something key that I often bring up, and I brought up and I'll mention later. I had taught for a year and a half in a high school, which was a kind of school to prison pipeline high school. And I kind of was trying to bring how to phrase these questions around posing criticality to students, where it's not really, it's essential for their survival to pose these conversations where they can be critical of their environment, but also it endangers me maintaining my job, and it causes a lot of unrest. So how do I kind of pose that criticality? And one of the ways I was doing it was bringing up ergonomics as a framework to say that anytime that you're experiencing discomfort in an environment is when the environment is telling you it's not designed for you. So this is kind of how we're used to seeing ergonomics. We've kind of estranged it from this very explicitly male body. And we're seeing this kind of androgynous figure that still resembles a kind of male stature. And this is what we're more familiar seeing when we're kind of witnessing, test drive dummies and things of that nature, showing generally like the span of how we might see, reach, extend, bend. But again, and there's so much to say even on the health of people who are not male or cis male, that our organ function is not prioritized and our health isn't taken seriously. Even the world is not designed for our health. So in the midst of just kind of preparing this intro for you, I thought this was quite interesting. I actually found a list of awkward postures that the government has actually posted. So lifting, carrying, maneuvering equipment, getting on or off apparatuses, wearing PPE, which again is another very, very political conversation following the pandemic, that any kind of ventilation or self-contained breathing apparatus is in some ways an awkward posture, is not a benign statement in and of itself. All right, so what I would like to do is hopefully not disrupt. Let me know if I pull up something that you see. I have some written notes I would love to hold in tandem. Did that become not full screen for you?
We can see the photo with the website on top. Like canva.com, we can read that website.
Okay.
But it looks great. It still looks good.
Okay. Well, I want to just look at some of my notes if that's not too much of a bother as I look at some of this. Okay. So as I was saying before with this idea of kind of the universal, there's no such thing as universal dimensions, right? That being said, as an artist, I only really have access to one body, and that body is my own. So here we're seeing me within a piece that I call Cocoon. And I just want to kind of introduce some of the questions I have for my practice. So it says, the questions in my practice are how furniture elicits comfort or discomfort to signify power and make spaces inaccessible to others, which is what I was already referencing. I grew into, towards the end of my practice at CCA, kind of doing these activated performances where I activated the sculptures. And I saw these performances as an opportunity to kind of perform a social mechanic where people can enact companionships with objects. And I was constantly saying that if we liberate objects, we have the potential to liberate people. Because when it comes to human rights, essentially speaking, people are being made figuratively objects, and that's the loophole that's being sustained. So if we can liberate objects, then we can liberate people. So I kind of see my performances as a nonverbal cue or a welcome for other people to play with the furniture and for it to kind of become a Marxist act of solidarity to liberate both objects and people from systems of use and abuse. All right. So this is the cocoon piece installed. And this was actually at the time of my final review. So I took the moment to throw Christine into the PowerPoint just for fun. And then this is Suzanne Cockrell, just herself. We're seeing like another person's body within the work as well. So I was really interested in playing with these different postures, right? Like I showed you this awkward posture list. I was interested on seeing how these different things, whether prescriptive or non-prescriptive furniture, could hold the body, and that there could be a kind of reverence for space where you're kind of sharing the space, you and this object. So obviously crawling into this, what's also really special is when you talk or you hear any other noise, the noise actually and the sounds around you actually kind of go within the vessel and kind of pop back up at you. And so there's kind of an amplified audio experience while you're within it. You also kind of feel held and nurtured. Then this piece right here is called Settled. It was probably like a 2-ton piece of cypress. It was like a log that literally had to be forklift onto the back lot at CCA. And this was the chair class I was referring to. This is when I first got acclimated to power carving. I don't have any other work with that have been power carved within this presentation, but it is something I took my hand to again. And I really, really love it. So I just needed to do more with it. But anyways, again, thinking about physical fitness, thinking about breathing deeply. And when we kind of talk about breathing into the belly and how might I create a chair that creates that environment where I can breathe deeply for optimal breathing. I kind of was able to carve away at this chair where there was a perfect recess to hold my body, and the width of the stump allowed me to sit cross-legged here. And it even had a recess for the back of my neck, so I could sit perfectly upright as I'm supposed to, but the chair kind of alleviated any of that kind of body pain I would have if I were trying to ask that natural posture of myself. At the time, I was also doing units with Donald Fortescue, who's, I mean, at least 6'4", and he was able to sit in the chair comfortably as well. He might not have sat cross-legged, but he also felt the same way. So that was also really generative and exciting for me. And this is just a different angle for you to see kind of some of the contours of the interior of the chair. And then this one's called The Man I Want, which essentially was this boulder over here on the left-hand side. It's an artificial boulder. I have a little swatch in the top right-hand corner to kind of give you, I'm gonna actually go back full screening on this. Oops. Give me 1 second. Oop. That's gonna be better. Perfect. Okay. So in the top right hand corner is a sample study of kind of my material study that I did up front. So for starts, I'll just talk about how I physically made the work and then some of the ideas. So in terms of how I physically made the work, I started making this boulder first, and it was I made a plywood box that I then routed the edges to kind of soften the edge. And then I built up upholstery foam, so the material that you use to build couches. And then I essentially carved and shaped the boulder to the kind of intended shape that I wanted. And then you take a file card and you kind of rip off this metal pronged comb that's kind of similar to like what sometimes like a grooming dog brush looks like. And you then kind of thwack it, if you will, and it will kind of smooth out the upholstery foam. And then I painted it with latex paint, and then I flocked it. So flocking has normally a pigmented adhesive, and then these kind of fabric fibers that often correspond with the same color. And I actually mixed like 10 or 20 different fabric fiber colors in order to kind of since it's kind of intended to be anthropomorphic, I didn't want it to have an intended skin tone. I wanted it to be more reminiscent of a stone. So the kind of thought behind it was more along the lines of, as some of you might have experienced, I started my program in a relationship and ended my program not in a relationship. And I was also really, again, situated around looking to objects for companionship and looking to like foster a relationship with them. So ironically, in just a casual conversation I had with a cohort member's girlfriend, when referring to my type, I said something very tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, I want a man like a mossy rock, somebody like hairy and grounded. And so I was really just like, I have to make that. I don't know what that looks like. And so this is kind of what that is, or where that came from, at least the idea. And so there's kind of a butt crack on both of them. One's more subdued and the other is more overt. And the reason that there's two of them is I got one to the Root Division MFA Now program, or their show in my second semester, my second year. And then essentially everyone wanted me to have a boulder in my exhibition for my capstone. So then what once took me 4 months to make, I made in like 3 days. So I ended up having both of these. And so what I really thought was immensely special about this, which I'll show you the next photo, is since this kind of exists, it exists in terms of materiality as a piece of furniture, but it's a non-prescriptive piece of furniture. There's no intended way for us to know how to respond to this object, which made it especially interesting and in my mind successful, because now if we're supposed to be creating this new kind of companionship vernacular, or enacting companionship to kind of rewrite a human to object relationship, right? We need, if I put a chair in front of you, it's going to be limiting because we already have our preconceived notions on how we respond to chairs. Whereas people honestly thought this was a rock up until the point until you push it and it squishes much like a couch. So I kind of would like lay and drape myself over it like this. I'd often kind of rock back and forth and kind of like lay on this rock. This is a studio shot of it. And then I also was really compelled shortly after graduating in July, I moved cross country back home, and home is Maryland. So on my travel, I really wanted to do more of it, but it was not logistically I don't know, as feasible to do it as more than I did. But this was me. I put it out in the environment. I took it to Lake Tahoe and put it amongst real boulders, and really enjoyed even how it existed amidst nature and how it doesn't look too out of place as well. This next one is called Quiet Companion. And in the Quiet Companion piece, I was thinking about, you know, sharing space with objects as well as sharing space with plants. And I kind of loved the idea of a motorcycle and a sidecar and this kind of tethered companionship, or this kind of sharing of space. So I have the steel chair here with like this hand stretched leather seat and this kind of steel appendage that links this terrarium with this palm tree to the seat as well. Okay, hold on. I want to pause for 1 second. So that is the work that I have from my graduate program. I wanted to read a little bit about my thesis to you because that way you can kind of hear how my thesis was kind of the inception of when I started realizing how important writing was for me. Can you still see the PowerPoint or no?
Yeah, but it's smaller.
Okay.
It's not full screen.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up my notes on my phone so that we don't have to keep doing that. Here we go. Here we go. So I just wanted to read you a little bit of an excerpt from what I had for my thesis, because this is kind of where it all began. And the one thing I will preface, I did edit much of it out, but at one point I was really keen and stated in my thesis that I wanted to rename objects defixus anima, this idea of being like motionless and still being animate. For the most part, that's edited out. But the excerpt reads, I defend the aptitude that objects have for companionship through the contemporary philosophy of object-oriented ontology founded by Graham Harman. O is a philosophy that offers a new lens to reinterpret all beings believed to be living and non-living as that of equal substance, a philosophy posing a system of what I see as material equivalence by dethroning the knowledge of the human brain for the physical knowledge of presence through either contact or coexistence. Who are we to say who is living and non-living? Is this justification simply a form of entitlement of the brain? Who are we to privilege our nerve operator over another? Is it the brain telling us and the world around it its importance as a hope to withstand evolutionary modification? How might our brain telling our mouth to speak its privilege do anything but further derail our already domineering power structure that places objects at the base of the food chain? Graham Harman, a contemporary philosopher and author of object-oriented ontology and new theory of everything, expanded upon this notion of what I call material equivalence within the context of O, as he hearkened back to Aristotle's claim that while humans, animals, and plants may be different, a human is not more a human than a plant is a plant. That is to say, both are equally substances. This quotation establishes that all physical forms constituted of matter are thus all of the same material makeup, carbon. This allows for classifications between species and those believed to be animate and inanimate to be challenged, as how can this same material yield variations of differing aptitudes? The knee-jerk arguments to counter my previous statements mainly originate from a place of ableist discrimination, as well as a place of self-designated intellectual superiority. Harman, rightfully so, identifies that the problem is that we humans sometimes convince ourselves that knowledge is the only kind of cognitive activity worth pursuing. And thus we place a high value on knowledge, what the thing is, and practical know-how, what the thing does, while ignoring cognitive activities that do not translate as easily into literal prose. Even our own cognition has gotten in the way of our ability to think and perceive, much like privileging our sense of sight over all other senses, favoring the construct of intellect and removing all forms of experiential knowledge, reducing to simply the theoretical associations with words is risky. This is the territory of overgeneralizations and stereotypes. Just as stereotypes placed on people is demeaning, the same can be said justifiably so about these assumptions of characteristics given to objects. Objects require this space to exist as they are, free from their external implications of their function. Harman wrote, objects act because they exist, rather than existing because they act. It is for us to stop acquiring all these predetermined opinions and to simply observe and marvel at how these beings can energetically be truly captivating. Even this impression of motionless attributed to the definition of defixus makes them no less important, nor does it devalue their existence. Now that we may be better at detecting the presence of our inherent bias, I hope our joint self-awareness intervenes when necessary as I continue. I'd previously mentioned the impression that objects are non-living and just began posing questions to explore the polarity of the construct of living/non-living. It is at this nexus I will continue with delineating a new designation of existence by collapsing notions of living and non-living into one body of evolving matter, one always coming together and apart, is the inherent ecological backbone of my argument, that the interdependence and cycle of matter through birth, death, and evolution are all trivial as matters neither created nor destroyed. If that is to be true, then why must the human race constantly assert subcategorizations? The answer is to place the human in the position to preside over all resources. However, if we may stick with this notion of matter, then we are all products of the same material, and thus there is no determinate difference. One might argue there remains a difference as some individuals die and others do not, but there again I must argue on behalf of the constituents of ecology. Rocks would not often be characterized as living, but this notion of death is the notion of disappearance. But disappearance of what? The body still remains if the notion of self does not, of the individual does not. There again, placing the focus on death of the brain. The matter still remains cyclically being transitioned as the body enters decay. Here in the case of the rock, there may be a longer lifespan. However, the rock evolves chemically as it undergoes decay. The parent material evolves into the daughter elements. That being said, the rock undergoes transformation, and often there comes a time where the presence of the original material no longer exists. This could be argued as the death of this individual. The reason humans may find this significantly different is because we societally value our cognitive genius, and to die is to lose what we value most. We attribute significantly less sympathy for the rock, as one might feel under our societal conditioning that they have, in fact, not lost a thing. All right, so that's the end of that excerpt. So leaving grad school, I started living in Maryland, and I was kind of taking public transportation and found myself kind of just like holding one of these metro bars. There's like obviously a lot of public transportation bars in order to keep ourselves standing upright. And I started realizing essentially how ableist and like ill-equipped the design was in terms of public and semi-private spaces. And so I kind of developed these stickers that were, say, obstruction identified, and I was embarking on this ongoing project called the Spatial Threat Project, where essentially you would use these stickers to publicly deface kind of exclusionary design practices in real life. So the sticker is this kind of oval and red. And this was shortly before the pandemic. I think that interestingly enough, there's kind of these two severances in my timeline, the severance of, you know, grad school and then moving across country. And then once again with the pandemic. And some of the things I'm going to show you are things that I might have started and intend to kind of come back to. And this is one of those examples. So the Spatial Threat Project, the mission says this project develops awareness and enhances criticality around exclusionary design. Essentially, it's essentially taking back the power by defacing and vandalizing the object that actually is causing the aggression in the public sphere to make people feel rejected by the space around them. All right. And then I was like kind of finding that there were other limitations, like here's a sticker and it worked in the context of where I had the idea. But then in things like this, the Martin Luther King Jr. memorial statue is significantly larger than life, where my sticker has absolutely no standing ground in terms of scale. But it is, again, another issue to think about how millions of dollars went into commemorating Martin Luther King Jr. and they choose to represent him in white stone. And there's an ongoing history in sculpture where, you know, African American and African figures are repetitively whitewashed in terms of their characteristics, and, you know, their busts are made in marble and plaster. So that's just one example. Following that, I started thinking about, much like the boulder, and trying to push materials to kind of behave in ways that they might not. I've been really taken with this idea of ceramic wearables. this piece was something that I started and I need to come back to. Whereas this one is one that I made during 2020, amidst the pandemic, or 2021. And I was thinking about, it doesn't necessarily have a name, but I was thinking about it as like a kind of chess piece. So thinking about COVID and getting these vaccination cards, I couldn't help but see the resemblance that the vaccination card was supposed to be toted around and brought with you everywhere. It felt very much like a Star of David, where we were being asked to kind of always have our identification papers on us. And in that regard, I was thinking about how long we had to wait to actually get the vaccine. And it felt kind of like two parts. Like it felt like there was a kind of level of protection with the vaccination, in the sense of it, like this piece feeling somewhat reminiscent of armor. And in another way, it also felt kind of like a privilege. It took, especially at the very beginning, it took a long time for the medication to be disseminated. So I was thinking about this chess piece existing both in the context of it being a form of protection, as well as it being a kind of jewelry or a place of adornment. And I kind of just affixed this pocket to perfectly hold the piece. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I just have to admit someone from the waiting room.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, perfect. So I just thought also, like, there was something very iconic in the fact that the COVID vaccination card had such an iconic shape. So I thought that creating this kind of ceramic wearable that you could essentially be carrying your COVID vaccination form around with you was quite interesting. So following that, during the pandemic, following the murder of George Floyd, I had a bunch of friends reach out to me, one of which was also a CCA MFA graduate. They were a former roommate of mine, and they were a film major. And I was invited into co-founding the Black X Collective. And for about 2 years, we held an international film festival that showcased the work of Black filmmakers and Black musicians. The film festivals were held online and they were streamed in over 10 countries. And each year we raised over $14,000, and all of that money was donated to Black-run organizations and Black lives. We didn't take any of the money whatsoever. It was strictly volunteer. And we were also fiscally sponsored by a nonprofit based out of Oakland. I was going to show you the most recent trailer. If this will play, I believe it will. Let me know if there's any issues on your end.
I walk lyrically, though they try to lock, chain, seal tight my spiritual still. I pity you. Bellow of full play, a freedom song and a hyphy haiku. The gay area turf talk ghetto gospel class. Ooh, generation that's been asked. I'm asked. And most of me not written on paper for school books, except by blood on the leaves that often drink my lifelines down to its roots. From the sweat, to tears, the jazz fertilizing the taste of my fruit. OG stands for organic with the juice. All of me is all of you. Soul, the food, and the heaven that breathes by the way we breathe. I'm the heme, I'm clean. Yeah, that I mean. Oh, yes, indeed. I'm everything. Black. My blackness is everything.
So working with this group, each one of the members of the collective essentially sat on the curatorial panel as we selected the work. And I was appointed the chief of art relations, which really pertained to me securing in-person screening locations for the film festivals. In 2021, we worked with the Phillips Collection, which is a museum. It's actually the America's first modern art museum in Washington, D.C. At the time, I was friends with the head of public programming, And we essentially arranged for a multiple day film screening at the Phillips Collection, which is in DuPont Circle, which is like a predominantly white kind of waspy neighborhood with essentially good donorship. And they had a sister space in Southeast DC, and that space is called the Arc, and there's a lot more performance and theater going on in the space. And so we essentially curated, and to go to that note, that the Arc in Southeast is also predominantly Black neighborhood. So we actually were, the curation of the film festival did in fact differ between the programs that were offered in both locations to ensure the safety of those people coming to see the films. And the real unfortunate thing was, after 8 months of planning this, a week before we were going to have the event, Omicron hit, and the Phillips Collection unfortunately had to cancel this event. But it was a fantastic learning experience, at least. Following that, during the pandemic, it's always funny kind of having space from projects, especially ones that you think failed at what you thought you were trying to do. It's kind of now clear to me that what I was doing was I was just kind of fostering a community that I was calling company, and the idea of being in good company. Originally, I was thinking that we were going to kind of band together and kind of create our own platform to sell our work in a venue that was not Etsy and didn't have those kind of cringe affiliations, if you will. And in truth, we ended up I created these weekly prompts where each of us would write poems or write songs or take photos or create GIFs and respond to a weekly prompt. And then I would compile them and send them out in kind of like a digital zine-like format. This week, which was the first week prompt, it said, "Who are you looking at?" And there's many different, again, poems, stories, article references, insecurities that are being kind of processed through looking at the things that we're not comfortable with, as well as just kind of like funny centered GIFs. This was the second week's one, which was "New Directions Are Hard." And like the front cover was something I had found on Instagram that I thought was really funny, which was just like, what is the direction in which you're supposed to place the seat covering? And this person admitted that they had been putting it in the wrong orientation their whole life, and how hard it is to even, pivot it in the right direction. And then other people, I'll read the one with the photograph at the top of the page. It says, "Peoria is a city that is located about central Illinois. It's not Chicago, so it's nowhere. At least that's what it seemed like. I moved there with my buddy Josh, who I met in Rockville, Maryland. He and I have been writing instrumental music for about 6 years now. We were conjoined by the hip, as you can see in this video, but that has been severed for some time now. I moved back to Maryland last year. He visits from time to time to jam and see old pals. However, music has become stale for me since. I do not pick up instruments like I once or eagerly did. I'm focused on work and our lives go on, accepting the reality of my outlook and love for music, as well as friends moving apart. It's a new direction, and it's hard. Also enjoy." And then he linked a song, an instrumental song that they had written together in the time that they shared during the pandemic. So that was kind of like, those are just two examples, but there was a bunch more prompts that had come out during that time. And then I kind of digress. So about fall of 2021, I started working at Dundalk High School. I had recently, or formerly, in this presentation, explained that it was a prison to pipeline school. And kind of, I was making my mission to kind of go against the culture of the school, which in so many ways was it put a target on my back, and it was a very interesting experience. The more I would support students, the more there was like lies that I allowed students to vape, so that there was like reason to fire me. A lot of interesting things like that was just what came out of the school. Even in my first year in teaching there, my boss was caught on video putting a student in a headlock and then was put on administrative leave. And he was sexually harassing the social studies department and like targeting us. It was a very, very layered experience, but it was also extremely telling because I felt really called at the time to teach because I wanted to get to adjunct teaching, and I had such an apprehension at the time. I didn't know, like I taught, I'd done graduate teaching assistantships at CCA. I had at that time already worked in a wood shop where I was education director, both like writing woodworking curriculum for adults and youth. And I was also teaching my own woodworking class for women non-binary and queer people. But the interesting thing with high school was I never realized the privilege in all those former positions where that people had paid for that education and there was a level of buy-in, which there just is not when it comes to high school. And in many cases, the students don't want to be there. And in the example of Dundalk, Maryland, the region doesn't require that they need even a high school diploma. They have the job that their parents already have. So there doesn't really seem in their landscape that there's any need to graduate from high school. And this is all in when they returned back to school. So it was just a time that I felt really compelled to want to, I was even sitting in my own shoes going like, wow, I don't know what my future looks like. I can't even imagine being in their position. So I went and I wanted to share this document, this kind of project I presented to them. I'm looking to make a publication with a compilation of all of their responses to this. But like I had mentioned before, kind of trying to turn them to orient them to being critical of their environment, I created this document. The kind of first two series of questions are the front and back of a two-sided worksheet. And that worksheet reads as redesigning school or how to make school suck less. And it says, today's objective, students will address the shortcomings of the public school system by identifying the problems with learning and the classroom environment to illustrate potential solutions. The meaning behind the lessons, it says, as people with bodies who live in the world and arrive at school during the week, I want to know how you experience comfort, discomfort, and how the building and the social dynamics of peers, teachers, and administrators supports or harms your development. We as artists are creative people who can critique and redesign the world we live in to support our growth and well-being.
Mallory, I have a question.
Yes.
What class did you teach?
I taught a fundamentals of art class, which is just it's a graduation requirement, so 9 through 12. And then I also taught 2D art, which was AP.
Oh, awesome. Cool. And did you do this survey in both of those classes?
Yes.
Amazing.
Absolutely. So I had just shy of 200 responses, which is really, really special. And I told all the students, I said, even if you're a 9th grader, that means that you've been in school for 10 years. So you're an expert. You know how you experience school. And I made the first worksheet, the front and back worksheet, 50 points. And this kind of goes back to my love for phenomenology, this like wisdom through lived experience. If you're a 9th grader, yeah, the whole world is telling you, at least in this school, that you're dumb and you don't know what you're talking about and you're just now in high school. Whereas if you can sit back and say, I've had 10 years of schooling, I know how school does and doesn't work for me. And I can earn 50 points just by writing down my lived experience. And that constitutes as knowledge, and that's being critical, and that's being an artist. That's pretty liberating. So I just want to share some of the questions I have on this worksheet. So what they have something called social emotional learning, which is really just trying to constantly have like a daily check-in with your students to see kind of what's going on. Sometimes they pertain to the lesson. In this case, it does. And other times it's like, who is the best French fries in the area? So you're just getting students to open up and hear what's going on at home. So in this case, yeah.
what kind of credentialing did you need to teach high school? If any?
So I'm gonna speak for Maryland because that's all that I know. But I did not get an education degree. So what I have my MFA and then I have a BA and a BS. So how that worked was I was what they call a conditional hire. And a conditional hire means that essentially I have specialized education in what I'm teaching, which makes me qualified. But I'm then on this kind of contract that requires me to continue my education in education courses. So after 2 years, the expectation is I would have finished 12 semester credit hours of education classes. And then come my 3rd year, I would have finished whatever was remaining. And technically, after 3 years of teaching in public school, you are what is considered tenured. And much like in college, it's hard to fire you. Whereas when you're not tenured, they can fire you for no reason, which again puts you in an extremely vulnerable state when you want to do things like inspire students in a school that's not designed for that. Does that answer your question, Christine?
So you didn't need a teaching certification?
You need a teaching certification. Yes, that's a better way of putting it. You need a teaching certification and you can start teaching before you have a teaching certification. You just then enter what's called a conditional hire like program, if you will, and then you have a certain end date when you need X number of credits done. You normally have to front paying for the classes, and then the county will reimburse you, but you always have to front it, from my experience.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Mallory.
No problem. No problem. I appreciate the question. Okay, so basically, I just had them writing down like their favorite and their least favorite thing about school, followed on kind of defining like what is the purpose of school? What does it do successfully, right? What's the problems? What does it fail at achieving or maintaining? Like what problems do you believe are chronic and hopeless? What freedoms do you wish you had at school? Like what stands in your way of having it now? When do you feel uncomfortable in school? Is there a specific time, furniture, lighting, person, etc., that contributes to that discomfort? How could classrooms be made to be more comfortable and welcoming? Do you feel safe in school? Why or why not? Do you worry about gun violence when you come to school? How do you feel when teachers either quit or out sick for prolonged periods of time? How would you like school to prepare you for life after school? Do you feel supported at school? Why or why not? So these are like some of the questions I was asking them. And some of the answers were really, really interesting and robust because, again, much like my unfortunate boss, there was also a teacher who was saying and physically kind of like touching students and other teachers, which was also something that I unfortunately was at the mercy of. And also I made it my mission to have that person removed from the school. And this form brought a lot of other circumstances like that to the surface to be addressed. So it was really impactful. And then the second worksheet that's on the side there with the box is just them asking them to just select a problem with school. And then I want to have them address it. And I told them that even if it's solved, you don't need to solve the problem. Like your solution could be knock down the school, you know, you don't have to rebuild it. Maybe everyone just like meets at the corner stop sign and you have school outside. Like that's perfectly viable. You don't have to, you don't have to reinvent the wheel and you don't have to be okay with what it looks like. So what problem would you pick and how would you address it? So again, the illustrations are really, really powerful. So I'm making this into a publication now with about nearly 200 responses or 200 students who participated in that. And so I've done a little bit like less object making, and I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. This is called rake. I feel like sometimes I know what to name my work and other times I just don't. This is the case of the latter. And I think a lot of it came up where when I was in COVID, I just kept being like, one, I was just emotionally so overwhelmed. And two, it was just like, I couldn't make sense of making work that looked like the work I made before because I felt like the whole world was totally different. So to keep doing what I was doing just felt completely out of touch. And I even felt that way when I saw other people making the same work or spaces showing work in the same way. It felt like everyone was like living in this kind of dystopia, and that a lot of things needed to change. And so I don't know, I was very paused for a while. So a lot of the projects I'm sharing with you, and in all truth, I was working full-time jobs up until mid-January. So most of the work I'm showing you is stuff I've started or stuff I've done kind of intermittently because I've now just kind of gotten more time to start making again. So this rake, the idea about it essentially was kind of in congruence with my graduate work, and in reflection with yeah.
Oh, mid-January, what year?
Mid-January of 2023, this year, I just got this adjunct position and my art collection like managing position. So those are two part-time jobs, which have given me a lot more time and freedom to be, I mean, honestly, everywhere, but it also allows me to take on a lot more freelance writing opportunities and to make more and different work. Whereas my high school teaching job was about an hour commute each way, and I worked full time. So I was thoroughly exhausted most of the time and didn't make a lot during that time frame. So
Thank
this
you for
really,
clarifying. Thank you.
yeah, no problem, no problem at all. So just talking about this rake, I was really thinking that like the pandemic brought up all of these kind of existential crises, and for us to reevaluate our relationship with the world around us in more than one way. And one way I think that was kind of skipped over, if you will, was our relationship to objects. If we're at home, and I think that there became an even greater, I don't know, urge to start purchasing things that were going to be shipped and delivered. So I felt like we became even bigger consumers than maybe we had even prior to the pandemic. So I kind of got interested in this idea of objects being personified. I had done the kind of vague personification of the boulder, but these being kind of objects denying being useful, and that they're no longer going to be or going to allow to use them. And the idea is kind of like furniture or objects going on strike. And this rake is kind of like the first fully finished thing that I've done in that kind of idea thread. I made this rake in 2022, and it has since been in, I think, 3 shows now. This is it's in its most recent spot. I haven't done any performances with it. Again, I think that because it's kind of on strike, it would feel antithetical, but here's a cute little photo of me beside it, so we have a kind of spatial understanding of it. So yeah, that's it. I was even manipulating the teeth of the rake so that they don't really go forward or backwards, and they go sideways and they twist and they rotate. So there's just kind of no using it as a rake anymore. This is an in-process shot, if you will. This wood table on the left-hand side is one I made back in 2021. Again, I was working at a woodworking facility and learning woodworking more in a kind of technical application way. And ever since then, in the same idea of furniture going on strike, I felt like the piece of furniture kind of shifting away from chairs from grad school. I was really thinking that my new interest is kind of tables, because during the pandemic, again, the whole conversation of needing to reorient to furniture and to objects and our relationships with them. The table was the gathering place in the home. It was the place in which you would eat your meal. It became the office, and it became the school. So for me, I feel like the pandemic really situated itself around the table. So I really wanted to have these kind of personified tables. And I've been kind of approaching this from many different ways. I've made multiple of these wood parts, and I've essentially molded them and been casting in plaster and casting in silicone. And this one is kind of a clay slab built version of it, where there's kind of this bend at a diagonal. So when it's upright, essentially no material can be sat on it, and the legs are going to be kind of dilapidated. So this is kind of an in-process shot. You don't really normally see that when people share stuff, but I'm just kind of showing you where I am and being 100% honest and authentic with what it looks like. So this is now in December of 2022, I got an eFlux reader published. This, in all honesty, was an open call. Thank you. Thank you. This was an open call published through eFlux. If you're somebody who likes academia, and can manage getting a ton of emails, or have a email that you're willing to sacrifice, I definitely highly recommend signing up for the eFlux newsletter. There was essentially an eFlux open call where the premise was you could select anywhere between 8 and 9 essays, and you would gather it around a theme. And this theme was supposed to be a 1-word theme that characterizes life following the pandemic. And my word was collectivism. And then you wrote an abstract as to like essentially how and why this one word is all encapsulating, and kind of how these other essays fit within the framework. So I just wanted to read you my abstract, and then I'll move on to the next slide. So the abstract reads: individualism dominated Western culture, proliferating the global market prior to the COVID pandemic, when the fragmented world shifted towards the age of collectivism. The unified experience of social estrangement and communal loss of time with family and friends brought about intense longing for proximity to people and the desire to experience oneself in community. An emphasis on the populace at large dominates the news headlines, identifying infection rates, death tolls, war casualties, and employment vacancies. Following the murder of George Floyd, tens of millions of people came together to move their bodies in the power of the crowd to command change and attempt to topple racist institutions. The infrastructure for change exists within the power of collective action. Being in unison can feel empowering, liberating, and intoxicating. Dissolving one's personal identity into the collective can be the first step toward garnering trust in something greater, otherwise known as hope. So that was my abstract. And so that was published in December of 2022. So that was kind of my first really big, exciting thing. And that rake was also shown in a small museum in Maryland, which was my first museum show as well. So these are all kind of really like special moments. And then Art Scene magazine, which is based out of the UK, they essentially featured me in the spring 2023. I was notified in the late fall of 2022, but this was published in spring of 2023 with a kind of it's actually like 4-page spread following my work, both the work from my grads program as well as my rake. And so that was honestly another really lovely opportunity to be published, but this is more of like a feature. The writing that they shared were kind of excerpts from maybe my artist statements or things on my website, but I did not write in this one.
Was that an open call too? Was that an open call, or was it?
This one was also an open call, yeah. So I'm a very big proponent on open calls, and some people might disagree, and you're perfectly fine to disagree with that. I think that there's a lot of really wonderful opportunities, and to get your name out there is a really wonderful thing because you're meeting so many new and different people. And one thing I really enjoy is also open calls that ask and essentially present, like, I'm not saying apply for something that's like, oh, the theme is bloom and it has absolutely nothing to do with your work. No, I'm not saying do that, but I'm saying find something within your realm or something that asks you to stretch, because I love the idea of like outside of the container of school to be asked new criteria, or to ask myself to expand or to think of materials in different ways. It's actually it's gotten me to propel my practice forward. So I think it's really, really generative and a wonderful opportunity. And what I want to tag along to that is some open calls that I applied for and I didn't get. Now people are reaching out to me saying, like, through Submittable, saying, hey, we really want you to write for us. No open call. It's now actually like a direct request. So I do think that it also opens a lot of opportunities up for you. To kind of even have people follow up with you after the fact. So that's my 2 cents on that. But I got featured in Art Scene magazine by way of an open call. If you are interested in writing, I highly recommend Medium. It's free. You can link it to your websites. You can publish your own stuff as it comes up. It's a great visibility platform. And I do want to like read something because it leads into my next project, if you will. But essentially I had applied for a fellowship and I didn't get it, but I was really, really moved. And in the interview, I was talking about all this kind of COVID responsive, very engaging ways of trying to create art programming following the pandemic that really made sense of where the human condition was, etc. And this woman was asking me, as I was kind of characterizing like the gallery in a new form. And this, for context, is in 2021. And this woman was like asking me about these questions and saying, so, okay, so like, what does the gallery in the new form look like? And so we were talking about a bunch of things of what that looks like. And frankly, I just sat down on my Medium account and I wrote this. And so I just want to share this with you. This excerpt led me to this next opportunity where I'm going to use a portion of this in the publication. And that next publication was by way of a proposal and it was granted. There is a written honorarium, so I'm going to get paid for it. But I just want to read you this chunk first off that I wrote on Medium. And so I titled it The Gallery in a New Form. And again, just for context, this was written in 2021. We're talking about like art programming. So it says, some thoughts on art galleries as a new form. The art world has prided itself on the ability to function in its own global market while asking artists and makers to respond to the human condition, ebbing and flowing through renditions of personal and collective experiences. With the shake of the global market and social estrangement, and social estrangement that the pandemic left in its wake, lay the millions who did not survive and the rest of us grappling to bridge the gap of life before and afterward. The George Floyd murder protests were marched worldwide with demands of institutional reform, and art spaces sit perplexed in a long-winded bureaucratic halt of strategic planning. The pause to redirect is honorable. The constipation and pace is inexcusable. The hallmark texts of the previous century championed the terminology of the white cube, scorning the estrangement from reality and the integrated institutional whiteness that prevailed in the untouchable art, making those who frequented the spaces feel unsafe and unwelcome. Art now exists online in saved files, organized in apps and populating inboxes and electronic trash bins. The proliferation of the visual image and moving images have dominated the landscape, where Instagram and TikTok have inundated the populace to a position of being overly entertained, where the brain no longer craves ideas, but seeks to break from the noise. The need to find center and space for the individual has become a necessity in the COVID endemic, with privately owned news stations and the ceaseless updates on news feeds. Though the need to separate from the noise of the curated digital world and the people paying to be heard most loudly and uninterrupted, the human need still longs to connect with people to which they have been physically estranged. The moving and still image at this time is not the mechanic to teach and approach the people of this world suffering from overwhelm, nor is the production of objects, as there's no need for more stuff. The art world ought to cater to people as they seek an outlet to do something. that something could be trivialized arts and crafts, or visit and fund an institution temporarily showcasing the phenomenological testimonies of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and queer gender expressions as it remains in vogue in the art world. And by all means, fund the arts and support the work of Black, brown, and queer artists. But how might the art gallery and art museum cater to serving the community rather than cherry picking the stories they wish to share? Libraries have now become centers to receive free COVID tests, pharmacies administered free vaccinations, schools and neighborhoods have free food pantries, and yet the gallery and museum sit affixed in their architectural spot, sharing stories from artists who live this reality and do not yet move physically into the communities to which they say they support. The inflexibility of the physical location provides the creative opportunity for the gallery to mimic food trucks and occupy pop-up locations to serve the needs of the community in forms of free stores, free workshops with in-person replay opportunities to house and share a collective knowledge beyond the temporality of exhibitions and not reliant on an internet connection. How might the gallery become the contemporary bathhouse, whereby the gallery has situated itself around accommodating all classes and people, providing a communal space, sharing healing, and a space for leisure to accommodate each person's birthright to safety and pleasure, is the beginning of reimagining the form of the art space and a greater container for social practice and community arts. The desire to forfeit the long coveted individualistic pursuit has since shifted to wanting to gather to offer service in a community of like-minded people. The root of subsequent actions originate from wanting to feel a greater connection to self and the geographical local world around oneself. This idyllic collectivism does not find itself in the capitalist workforce, as the very root of the system is to exploit the individual rather than the individual to give to the group with a mutualistic exchange. All businesses lacking mutualism have since reaped what they have sown, seeking workers to fill the undesirable shoes of those before them. Though the art spaces could provide where the economic industries fail, art spaces can offer the venue for mutualistic exchange and social enterprise, giving people the platform to offer the service and connection the collective most diligently seeks. So that's what I wrote back in 2021. And it inspired me when I once again, ironically enough, went to eFlux on the newsletter. And I saw that there was a program hosted by Washington Project for the Arts, which goes by WPA in DC. And this space is a nonprofit that essentially executes artist proposed projects, and the program is called How Can We Gather Now?
Mallory,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna time check because we're at 5:22, and we usually take a break at 5:30. So you have about like 8 minutes, and then we're gonna take a break.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's perfect. Thanks. Perfect. So essentially, the program was called How Can We Gather Now? And it's an experimental symposium offered by Washington Project for the Arts. So I had that first chunk I read you, and then there's a very short chunk after that that I was going to add. So it said, following my internal question of how can the gallery become the new contemporary bathhouse, a year later, I was casually browsing my inbox and to my surprise saw an email from eFlux sharing the upcoming Washington Project for the Arts Experimental Symposium program entitled How Can We Gather Now? I felt my prayers had been answered and all the thoughts I had written about and proposed to create COVID responsive programming, here people were actually doing it. They had not yet released the programmatic agenda, though I knew I had to be there. I had to put my body in the space of this question. I wanted to place myself in proximity to those asking the same questions. So right here, next Friday, this is going to be published. Right now, it's somewhere between like 26 to 30 pages. And it's covering essentially all of the 3 days of the experimental symposium. And it's being published by Dirt. We have the logo over here in the top left corner. And essentially they do what they call an experimental review. So it's so funny, experimental symposium, experimental review. And I had literally no idea what that meant. So I just kind of took every creative liberty I wanted to, and they are 100% game for it. So I just gave you kind of two examples. The review is called Gathering Together as Ourselves as One. And this image shows there was essentially a group called Very Sad Lab, which they kind of help rehabilitate plants that aren't doing so well, and they also help propagate them. And there was a bunch of these ambient music artists who essentially were playing plant frequencies back to help heal the plants and heal the people as they're laying on these yoga mats. There's a lot of really interesting experiential art. There was a curator who brought in work from an artist where they engineered their own scent, and that scent had to be sent from Philly to Washington, D.C. to be smelled and experienced. And they call it, quote, the smell. And at the end of the symposium, there was multiple questions, one of which was, what worked this weekend? And the kind of mechanic and how we answered were through writing our responses on these sticky notes. So I took the photos and included the exact sticky notes and feedback that you see here on page 22 on the right-hand side. And then to speak more specifically to my job, I work at the Corcoran School of Art and Design at George Washington University. I'm presently in the classroom where I teach plaster right now. I have my class shortly before yours. So the building is on the left, and the interior, much like how CCA shows the nave, the Corcoran loves to show their atrium space, and that's a picture of it. I teach a 3D studio course called Fundamentals of Sculpture Material Investigations. It runs on Fridays from 1 to 5:30, and I have 7 students. Normally, it's about 10 students. And just a little history is the Corcoran School of Art used to be DC's art school, and they essentially went bankrupt in around 2012, and GW bought them. So there's a lot of mixed identities going on with that. Some just tactical advice I have is the book The Professor is In is a book that I bought, and the author, Dr. Karen Kelsey, she is technically educated formally in anthropology, but she has both a blog, she might have a podcast, and she has this book all on skills in which to write and groom your teaching application materials. A lot of them are really centered around getting tenure, but I told myself, like, if I want to be able to be seen in the pool, and the pool is so hard to be found in, then I need to have really great materials. So I actually worked with her on making my teaching materials, and all of the tricks that she says is really, really intelligent. So I recommend buying the book and or emailing her and working with her directly. And then I also really love this book. I got it in the audio book format, and it's called Designing Your Life, which I think is such a apt conversation right now as you look to graduate. And the two authors, Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, are both professors at Stanford, and they offer a class called Designing Your Life. And it talks about many different ways to cultivate that, and one of which centers around letting the people that you know what you're interested in. And that's kind of how I helped land my teaching position. My sister very much knew that I wanted to teach in college, and she works at a yoga studio. And at one point she overheard a regular yoga attendant say that they're the program manager for American University. And my sister was like, basically like, get out of town. My sister has her MFA. She's super interested, this, that, the other. And I shared my application materials. I made my application materials in spring of 2020. I shared it with this woman in spring of 2022, 2 years later. And we sat on a Zoom call for maybe about 2 hours, just talking about my practice, looking at my website, answering some direct questions she had. And she was supposed to get back to me following a residency, and she didn't. And I was like, oh man, like, that was a cute try. I liked where that was going, you know. And before I knew it, just out of the blue, at the turn of this year, going from 22 to 2023, I was looking to get out of teaching in that high school, and I had gotten the part-time job managing the art collection. And I originally had a secondary part-time job where I was going to be a gallery director slated. And right as I was about to accept that position, they started just changing the dynamic of the offer. Like, oh, you're now going to have to run the education program, or, oh, this can't be full-time, even though it was going to become full-time because we're not making the ticket sales we want. And things that, you know, been there, done that. I can hear that from a million miles away. I'm not going to do that. So I rejected it, and I came into 2023 completely baffled. Like, how did I go from trying to get rid of my full-time job to getting a full-time job and a part-time job? Now what? And I'd say like 2 weeks into 2023, I got an email from Dean Kessman, who's the head of fine arts here at Corcoran. And he said that I came suggested by a man named Andy Holton, who frankly, I had no idea who that was. And that he has a class for me to teach. And if I don't teach this class, they still really want me to teach for them. And I just like searched up Andy Holton, and apparently he ran 3D design and sculpture at American. And I thought maybe this relates back to Danielle being the woman my sister and I spoke to from the yoga studio, and Danielle confirmed it. And she then wrote me back saying, she also still wants me to teach for American. So this was kind of my in, and it really kind of goes back to the idea of letting your community know that you're interested, and they will help you find the right people. And if you want to pause there, we can pause there.
Yay.
Christine.
So great. Can we take a 10-minute break and then come back with questions, or are you done for the night? What are you feeling?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I can stay. I can definitely stay.
Okay, great. So I'll send my students out for like a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back with questions. Is that cool?
That seems to be cool.
Yay, thank you, Mallory. That was so
Thank you.
great. That was so great. Okay, everybody go take a 10-minute break. Yeah, if you're online, take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cool. Do you mind stopping screen share?
Yeah.
That was so amazing, Mallory. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I have like a couple